For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Welcome to Talking Point on Stat News Global. I'm Ramananda Sengupta, filling in for your regular host, Amitabh Ravi. Today, we're going to be talking about the events unfolding in Israel, where the Gaza Strip has been under attack for the past 3 months, ever since the October 7 attack by the Hamas on Israel. And Israeli Foreign Minister Eli Cohen has said that it will continue this war with or without international support. With me today is Mr. Marc Schulman, a Tel Aviv-based historian and journalist. He's the editor of HistoryCentral.com and a columnist for Newsweek. Thank you so much for joining us, sir. I really appreciate you taking time out.
My pleasure.
So, let's take it right from the top. What are the conditions that the government has sort of put down for the war to end? The
basic conditions are really twofold: the dismantling of the military and governmental capabilities of Hamas, and number two, return of the hostages, one way or the other. Those are the two main conditions. Israel cannot accept Hamas ruling Gaza Strip anymore. They've made it clear that the attack they made on October 7th was one attack, and they'll continue doing it. They've never accepted the state of Israel's right to exist, and they said they're going to keep on attacking. So if you need to take people at their words, it's not just rhetoric. They actually did it on October 7th. So Israel can't leave them in power in Gaza. That's the first and foremost aim, and the second aim, and the equivalency, is to get the hostages back. It's not clear. Today they recovered the bodies of 3 of the hostages that were killed by Hamas since they were kidnapped. So it's not clear how many hostages we actually can get back.
Or were they sort of released by the Hamas?
How many were released? I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Were these bodies recovered by the IDF?
They were recovered. No. They were recovered. A special force got intelligence, the locations of the bodies, and they retrieved them from some tunnel or someplace like that, and retrieved the bodies. These are 3 soldiers.
It's not that the Hamas said that you can take these bodies.
No, absolutely not. They don't. They've been holding bodies from 2014. 2 soldiers who they kidnapped and killed, or were killed in battle. They took the bodies in 2014, and up to today have never returned them. So they see the bodies as important bargaining chips. So only they, think bodies are something that you bargain with. But
raises a rather interesting point for me. I mean, how long do you think you can preserve a body for that long? I mean, you'd have to have special freezers and all that.
I'm sure they do. I'm sure they have freezers. It's worth it for them to do it. I mean, I don't know. That's a whole other story, obviously. And you have soldiers' families have been campaigning for all these years to bring back the bodies. So now, they've done extraordinary efforts to try to get back as many bodies as possible. There was a question, there's a question on Israeli TV about an hour ago before I got on, arguing whether we should endanger live soldiers in order to retrieve dead bodies. And that's a difficult moral dilemma, but there is a sense that, no one left behind if you can. And so the bodies are being retrieved. These are soldiers who were kidnapped and were alive and were killed by Hamas while they were in captivity. So I'm afraid that probably more of them like that. So we'll have to see what happens.
I know. So, but do you think this massive sort of retaliation, which is what the world keeps saying, on the Gaza Strip, is partly due to sort of, some kind of internal embarrassment by the government because they failed to sort of, predict this kind of an attack? Because, Israel has a reputation for being very, very good with its intelligence.
Okay, so there's clearly embarrassment. There's clearly, everybody has some little percentage of revenge in them, etc. When things like that happen, you try to control it. I mean, revenge is a human spirit or, base, but people of higher order of magnitude intelligence try to control their revenge and try to do things in a normal sort of way, calculated way. And I don't think it's true. I don't think with a massive level of attack has anything to do with revenge. It has to do with the fact that the goal is to remove Hamas from power. The goal is to do that in a military sense in the best possible way. The reality is we're dealing with a group of terrorists, so to speak, or a terrorist army, let's be more specific, that lives and works and fights from within civilian population in a highly dense urban environment. It is really sad and terrible that individuals who are not combatants are being killed. That's terrible. It happens in every war. It certainly happens anytime there's urban warfare. And it certainly happens when the other side completely ignores the laws of war and fights from within the civilian population. So I think it's terrible. I'm sad for these people who die, but there's no other choice really. If you want to achieve your goal of removing Hamas from power, you have to remove them from power. You can only do that with force. Now, Israel has overwhelming force. It's one of the big advantages it has in this battle is it has incredible amount of force from the air, from the ground, from the sea that it can bring to bear on any target. So they use it. They don't want their soldiers to die needlessly. But the only way to achieve this goal is to destroy Hamas. And unfortunately, they're fighting from within a civilian population. Look, all the civilians in northern Gaza were told to leave. Some left, a lot of them left, but some of them didn't. Those that didn't, I'm really sorry that some of them have died. It's really terrible, but I don't see any choice. I don't see any country who was attacked and had 1,200 of its citizens slaughtered, many of them practically in their sleeps, in their pajamas and everything else, and a significant number of them raped and everything else that happened on that day. I don't see any other country sitting by and saying, well, you know, we're going to send in the police to capture these terrible people. I mean, really? Any country in the world would go to war under these circumstances, and war is brutal. Look, yeah, I wish we could outlaw war, right? You know, there was an attempt in the 1920s to outlaw war. It was a great plan. I think it was and wonderful. Let's outlaw war. What happened after the 1920s? The worst war in the world's history. So until we change the DNA of people, we have to fight wars, and it's sad and it's terrible. And it's terrible people die.
You know, war, I think, is an intrinsic part of human nature in many ways. I don't think you can escape from it.
So far, not. You know, maybe we'll evolve. Maybe someday we will evolve. Maybe our great-great-great-grandchildren will no longer fight wars, or maybe we'll be busy fighting aliens, or who knows what, not each other. I don't know, but let's hope. I mean, we try to hope, right? We try to get through life without participating in a war.
I don't think I'll be around to see it.
No, I will certainly not be around to see it. There's no question about that.
That is the thing. Sorry, I was just wondering also that, you know, do you think the fact that civilians are being also sort of hit as collateral damage in this particular instance is part of the reason why a lot of the world powers are sort of, you know, asking Israel to tone it down?
Okay, so there's no question the images of civilians being killed is a terrible image. And of course, no one wants to see that. Everyone says, ceasefire, right? Why should civilians die? And I understand the urge for that. The reality, though, is a ceasefire means Hamas wins. That's the bottom line. If you have a ceasefire now, Hamas wins, it stays in power. It lost some fighters, but it stays in power. It doesn't pay the price for what it did on October 7th. So I understand why the urge is to do that. There's also a lot of domestic pressure that some of these countries feel. In other words, I'm willing to bet that a lot of these countries, the leaders quietly are saying, go right ahead and do it because Hamas is a problem for the whole world. Terrorism is a problem for the whole world. Show that terrorism doesn't pay, but they have populations. Some of them immigrants from the Arab world, some of them just people who just don't like seeing these terrible images. And so for the purpose of their populations, they're saying ceasefire now. They know the United States is going to veto anything in the United Nations, and so it's not relevant. So it's good politics to say ceasefire now. And then, of course, there are bad actors like Russia or others who have different interests altogether. But most of the countries were saying ceasefire now, and I assume that includes India. I would make you a bet that the leadership quietly is saying, do what you need to do. But for public opinion, we got to say ceasefire now. And I accept that as the real world.
You mentioned Russia just now, but would you like to just explain to the people, particularly in India, who don't really have a very clear picture of the other major actors involved in this whole issue? I mean, sure. Iran is one for sure.
Right, but those two issues are tied together, obviously. So traditionally, during the period of time of the Soviet Union, Israel had mixed relations with the Soviet Union. Israel was recognized by the Soviet Union immediately in 1948. It had diplomatic relations until 1967. But at that point, actually in the 50s, the Soviets decided that the Arabs would be good proxies for them. And they started arming the Arabs in 1955. And they voted with them consistently after that. And also after they saw that Israel didn't end up being, despite some socialist inclinations, did not end up being a communist country and ended up being much more of a Western country. So they ended up supporting the Arab countries over a period of time. after Glasnost and the opening of the Soviet Union, Israel established diplomatic ties with Russia. There's a fair amount of Russians who moved to Israel. So there's a large community of Russians in Israel. They do business. There's been a lot of ties that have been developed over a period of time. And there was some hope, I always thought mistaken, that Israel could, establish Russia as a counterbalance to the United States in some form or another. But I think with the way Putin has been acting over the last few years, that was really unrealistic to begin with. I thought it was a mistake on our part not to support the Ukrainians fully, but that's a different story on the side. But what's developed now more so is the Russians seem dependent on the Iranians, of all things, for arms. And so there's this codependency that exists. There's an issue of oil that they're both working to sell on the open markets, with both of them being in some form or another under sanctions. And so they work together with oil, and as well as the Russians are buying a lot of Iranian arms at this point. So Iran is a strong ally of the Russians, and the Iranians have been behind a lot of what's been going on here. They've been supporters of Hamas. They've given them money. They have direct control of Hezbollah in the north, which is an on-again, off-again sort of war. And then the Houthis in Yemen, who are clear client states of the Iranians, and get all of their arms from the Iranians and probably their marching orders as well to a large extent. So the Russians are tied together with all of this in those ways. Israel still has diplomatic ties with Russia. Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke to Putin this past week. I don't think both of them yelled at each other, I think. I don't know if they made any progress at all, because interests are very different. But we'll have to see.
But, isn't it slightly ironic, given that I believe a lot of Jews migrated from Russia to come to Israel after World War II?
Well, look, most of the Jews that came from okay, so a percentage came right after World War II who had transited through the Soviet Union during the war. And there was a lot of Polish Jews who had survived because they were on the other side of Poland. And when the Russian troops came, they went back into Siberia. They went back with the Russians in Siberia. So those people came to Israel immediately. But after that, for many years, the gates of Russia have been closed to Jews. And there was a whole movement starting in the 1970s, Soviet Jewry movement, to allow Jews to leave the Soviet Union. They slowly started opening the gates a little bit under Reagan, and more Jews came. And then, of course, once the Soviet Union fell, the gates were completely open. And so there were about 1 million plus former residents of the Soviet Union, Russian Jews, so to speak, living in Israel. So there is that connection. But then some percentage of them are actually Ukrainian, so it gets even more complicated. So the reality is there is that connection. But on a geopolitical level, Russia has put its hat in with Iran and with the other side of the, what would be considered the rejectionist states, or, Iran, and with North Korea, and those other countries that are very much allied against the United States in the geopolitical world.
Mm-hmm. So the Hezbollah, for instance, I believe is also trying to do something on the Lebanon and stuff like that. So what are the other sort of players other than the Hezbollah and Iran? Are there any other major players arrayed against you? What about Egypt? Because they blocked refugees from getting into Egypt from the Gaza Strip.
Right. So Egypt has been our friendly enemy, so to speak, since we signed the peace agreement. We have diplomatic relations, we have security relations, we work closely with them on issues of border and security. We have trade, all those things exist. We're hardly close friends, but we're not enemies. And Egypt has been more or less cooperative. Egypt doesn't want the refugees from the Gaza Strip. Look, the reality is Israel, during the peace agreement with Egypt, had offered to give back the Gaza Strip to the Egyptians. Israel never really wanted to keep the Gaza Strip, but the Egyptians didn't want it back. So the Egyptians don't particularly want it. They find, look, Hamas is allied with the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is against the current government in Egypt, and the Muslim Brotherhood has been engaged in terrorism in the Sinai deserts for the last 10 years. So Egypt isn't looking for more problems in that way. So basically, no one really wants the people from Gaza, for better or for worse, and that's part of the problem, of course.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that a lot of people are saying is that, a war like this is also a war of perceptions. And the fact that the Palestinians or the people in the Gaza Strip seem to be getting away with a lot of gory images of, children dying and children being hurt in the bombing. Israel is not able to cope with that kind of a perception battle. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with it in the sense that, look, Israel did not show, except in private showings, the videos of what took place on October 7th. It felt it was too gruesome. It doesn't believe in those type of videos. It also believed in the privacy of the families who,
Absolutely.
scenes,
Absolutely.
and
Yes.
did not want to show those things. It's what Israeli public has never even seen the October 7th. They were shown in private showings to members of the Knesset. They were shown in private showings to members of the press. They have never been released. The gruesome images from October 7th have not been released. The Palestinians are more than happy to show their gruesome images. Some of them real, some of them we've seen have made up by AI. So
Exactly.
okay, it's an uneven battle, but on some levels, it's a battle of a moral battle. On some, if we lose our morality, what are we fighting for? And that's part of our morality. We don't want to show death images. We never show death images. We think it's wrong for the families. It's wrong for people to watch it. There are people who love watching, snuff videos, I think they're called, right?
Absolutely.
Watching
Yes.
people watching. Okay, well, I don't want to participate in snuff videos. That's the reality. Now, it leaves us to be, one hand tied behind our back in terms of fighting the propaganda war. But so be it. Let us fight the clean battle as best as we can instead of going down to their level.
Mm-hmm. The other perception that comes to mind is that the tunnels, which are apparently all under, hospitals and other places where, people would normally not attack. Now, there's a rumor that, Israel originally built those tunnels and these guys are just using it, as a getaway kind of a thing. But from what little I've seen, there seems to be a huge array of tunnels under the thing. And now there's talk of putting seawater into those tunnels to flush these guys out. Were the tunnels originally made by? Who made the tunnels?
They made them themselves. The Hamas has been building tunnels since they started, even before they came to power. They built the first tunnels between Egypt and the Gaza Strip to smuggle things into the Gaza Strip. Those are the original tunnels were there. They learned their tunneling skills back then. But since they've gained power, they've constantly been building these tunnels. For the last 15 years, they spent a good portion of their aid money on building tunnels. Some of these tunnels are reinforced with concrete. They're not, little tunnels that you and I would build through sand or etc. They're serious tunnel network they built. They're all over the Gaza, and the entrances go into, many, many civilian buildings and into every hospital. And they're below every single hospital, every single school, every place that you would not want the Israel to strike. That's where they build a lot of the tunnels, so that we can't send, tunnel busting bombs to get them. So it's everywhere. And keep in mind something else that people don't understand is that, the people who work in the hospitals, the directors are also people who work for Hamas. And the reporters who are reporting from Gaza, there are no independent reporters. You can't go in there as an independent reporter. Every single reporter in Gaza is a stringer. There's also a Hamas member. So keep in mind that no one's independent. On that side, there are no independent journalists. They're all Hamas members. So that further complicates any true journalistic view of what's going on.
Mm-hmm. But, given that, it's all easy to say, okay, we want Hamas to be sort of removed from the picture altogether. But isn't that a very difficult thing to actually achieve? How will you say that, okay, I managed to get rid of the last Hamas activist? It's almost impossible to say that.
You can't do that. What you can do is two things. Excuse me. You can destroy every tunnel. It's a big process, it's a long process, but there are tunnels, you can destroy them. You can destroy them, with sending in explosives and blowing up. That's what they're doing, is whenever they find them, they're doing that. They're using seawater from other ones that they found, they experimented with it and it works. They're not only using the seawater to flush them out, they use them actually to destroy the tunnels. So water is a very strong ingredient and it works its way and it can destroy the tunnels just as well. So the goal is A, to destroy all their tunnels. B, to capture all of their rockets and all of the equipment they've made to make their rockets. And if you do all of those things, you manage to take away most of their arms, and then you have some other government in charge, and you have the ability to go back in, and if you see anyone trying to build anything, you go back in and take it away. That's the goal. Will it be achieved? I'm not 100% sure, but that is the goal. It's an achievable goal in theory. Very difficult. Look, you can't eliminate the idea of Hamas. You can't eliminate the idea, right? But okay, but there's ideas and there's capabilities, and it's one thing people can still have ideas. I have an idea. I want to be a billionaire. That's a great idea. I'd love to be a billionaire and be a philanthropist with billions of dollars. Well, guess what? It's an idea. It's not like I can't do that. The Hamas can keep on having ideas of destroying Israel, people, individuals, but if they have no rockets, if they have no guns or very limited guns, if they have no tunnels to hide in, then they're ineffective. And that's really the goal, to show that it's ineffective. And the hope, this is the hope, is that if by showing that the Hamas way doesn't succeed, and you realize that Hamas has been the element that has disrupted any peace talks going all the way back to the 1990s. You know, after Oslo and after the Rabin assassination, when Shimon Peres was running to be prime minister, the reason Bibi Netanyahu won against Peres was because the Hamas engaged in a whole bunch of suicide bombings during the election campaign. They disrupted the campaign. Israelis suddenly got scared, and they decided, instead of voting for Shimon Peres, who might have expanded the peace process, to go with Bibi Netanyahu, who continued it a little bit, but was not exactly enthusiastic, let's put it that way. And that was Hamas. And every time there's a sign of peace, they want to destroy any chance of peace. Now, does that mean there'll be peace because Hamas is gone? I don't know. But there's a greater chance if Hamas is gone and people realize, wait, this way of going does not work. There's no chance of succeeding in any set of independence or freedom if we keep on attacking people, destroying people, and fighting. Maybe there's another way. Will that work? I don't know, but it's at least worth a try. Let's put it that way.
It's worth a try, but there'll also be this political thing that no matter who comes in, if it's a democratic government, people will assume that it's set up by Israel. That's a possibility.
True, there's no question, but it still has to be. Look, keep in mind, as long as there are no rockets, as long as there are very little number of guns, and there are no tunnels, then who comes into power still is not going to be a threat. And as long as we have the ability of going in there and they realize if we see people starting to build rockets or starting to build tunnels, we go back in immediately and destroy it. If we have those abilities, then I think we can make sure that they never have the capability, or at least not in the foreseeable future. Is it a perfect solution? No. Perfect solution with somebody to spread peace dust on all of us, and we can all live happily ever after. But no one's developed that yet.
So, I mean, it's been a very, very sort of enlightening conversation already, but we're running out of time. So let me just, ask you one question that seems to be on everybody's mind as well, which is that a lot of people keep talking about this two-state solution. If you could just quickly tell us what that actually means and why it's not happened so far. And even if it does, do you think that will bring peace?
Okay, so the two-state solution is the idea. Look, very originally, the United Nations voted for the partition of Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state. The Jews accepted it, the Arabs did not, and that was the civil war that developed and then the attack by the Arab states. The two-state solution is the idea that we once again set up a two-state solution, that the Palestinians would get the Gaza Strip and some portion of 80%, 90%, 100%, whatever, part of the West Bank, and they would have a state in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. That's the idea. It was pushed forward a number of times. That was the idea behind Oslo. It was certainly the idea that Ehud Barak brought to Camp David and offered 95% of the West Bank to Arafat. Clinton then increased that to about 96 and 97%. Arafat said no and never came back with an alternative solution. The reality is, in the two-state solution was, again, Ehud Olmert also went forth with one, again, was never accepted. The problem is that the Palestinians have not accepted two things from the very beginning. That is that Israel is here permanently, that it's not a temporary existence, and two, the right of return of all their refugees. Now, keep in mind, in 1948, there were approximately 700 to 800,000 refugees created by the war. Some left voluntarily, some just were afraid, and some were pushed out. Some combination therein. That's the historic facts. Every other point was 700. How many people were refugees when India was founded, between India and Pakistan? I think it was close to 100 million, basically, between the two.
Yes.
Between the two. So we had 700,000. They couldn't be resettled anywhere else, it seems. And since then, the 700,000 has become like 7 or 8 million. So obviously 7 or 8 million refugees coming back into a country of 10 million, which includes 2 million Arab Israelis, is not exactly a solution for a Jewish state. But they're not willing to accept anything else until they're willing to accept the fact that they're going to resettle wherever they are now, whether it's in Lebanon or Jordan or the West Bank or in Egypt or wherever they are. They are new citizens of those countries. And the idea of returning to their homes that they left in some village in Palestine is never going to happen, because it's 75 years later. They're no longer there. You're talking about the grandchildren or great-grandchildren. Then we can have peace. Then it's possible. But so far, I've never seen that happening. And of course, we have our own extremists on our side, which is another problem altogether. So,
So let me, conclude with the last question. If you were to sort of, peer into your crystal ball and sort of try and tell us what are the two options that you see before you, 2 or 3, immediate options that you see before you. What could happen?
For the short term, I see the most likely scenario is Israel completes its attack on the Hamas, manages to gain control totally of the Gaza Strip, that some form of some sort of government is created among some of the people who used to work for the Palestinian Authority. They deal with civil issues, health, education, and everything else. Israel maintains some sort of security presence in the Gaza Strip, and slowly but surely, it moves to some sort of self-government in the Gaza Strip, either tied to or not tied to the West Bank, with the realization that Israel will maintain security control of some kind or another for the foreseeable future. That is the most likely outcome. A less likely outcome is it just pulls out completely and the chaos reigns. And possibly 3 is because of world pressure, whatever else, Israel is forced to withdraw and Hamas regains power. I don't think Israel will allow the last option. I think the first option is the only option that's acceptable to Israel at this point. And the reality is we have the ability to make it happen. And it's just a high price that will have to be paid. So I think that's the most likely outcome. It's not the best outcome in the world, but it's better than all the other outcomes at this moment.
Well, one can only pray that that's how it's going to be. It was a terrific sort of time talking to you, and I really appreciate your candid sort of responses to the questions. I'm sure it will clear the minds of a lot of people here who have a very superficial idea of what exactly is going on there. Thank you so very much for joining us, and I look forward to having you again on much peaceful times, I suppose.
My pleasure. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. That was Mr. Marc Schulman, a journalist and historian from Tel Aviv, telling us about the latest situation in Gaza and what he thinks is likely to be the eventual outcome. I hope you enjoyed this edition of Talking Point, and we look forward to seeing you back with us again. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe at the end.